Paradox and Colossal Order finally announced the long-awaited and heavily rumored sequel to Cities Skylines earlier this year, and I have to admit, I have been thoroughly preoccupied with it ever since the first screenshots started being leaked to the public. But even though I am highly anticipating the sequel and would love to talk for hours on end about my expectations and wish lists for what the sequel will include, I actually want to spend some time to talk about the first Cities Skylines, which, believe it or not, was still seeing new expansion packs as recently as this spring. A few years ago, I made a video venting some long-standing frustrations that I had with the expansion model for Cities Skylines. Specifically, the fact that each expansion seems to be one or two mechanics or concepts short of feeling truly great, and that new features and concepts are never backported into the legacy content. The video was published just after the announcement for the campus expansion, but prior to me playing that expansion. Since then, the Sunset Harbor DLC has been released, and after a 2-year hiatus, probably due to COVID, the Airports expansion was finally released in early 2022. Then there was the Plazas and Promenades expansion in the fall of 22, the Financial Districts DLC, a deluge of content creator packs that winter, and then the Hotels and Retreats mini expansion in 2023. So I thought I would take a few minutes to revisit that old topic and catch up with how those later expansions turned out, and if they continued the problems of the previous expansions, or heck, if they somehow managed to make the problems worse. Long story short, I don't know if somebody at Colossal Order saw my blog posts or watched that video complaining about the expansions of Cities Skylines, but they seem to have finally, here at the very end, started taking those complaints into consideration when creating new expansions. The last few expansion packs and content creator packs have actually directly addressed some of my broader criticisms with the earlier expansions, and also some of my more specific and esoteric complaints and wishlist items. Though there are still plenty of things that they never did get around to fixing or adding, and I'll talk about some of those too. The expansions that have been released since Campus, with I think the sole exception of Airports, have not really doubled up on mechanics that were already existing in the game. For example, Sunset Harbor added a new fishing industry, but since there wasn't already a legacy zonable fishing industry from the base game or any of the other previous expansions, the Sunset Harbor mechanic doesn't feel like it renders such legacy fishing industries redundant and obsolete, the way that the Industries expansion did for the legacy zonable agriculture, lumber, oil, and ore industries from the base game. That being said, I was still underwhelmed and a bit disappointed by Sunset Harbor overall. I still feel like Sunset Harbor should have been part of the Industries expansion. It also continued to fall victim to my other core complaint, which was that it missed opportunities to upgrade and improve legacy mechanics by backporting new infrastructure, mechanics, and game rules onto older legacy content. For example, Sunset Harbor allows fishing routes to be drawn outside of city limits, so that fishing boats can travel up or down rivers or along coasts into quadrants of the map that are outside of the city's boundaries and aren't legal for the player to normally build things. This is, of course, immensely useful. But you know what would have also been useful? If Colossal Order had extended that same courtesy and functionality to the legacy water routes that already existed in the game. Despite this functionality being available for fishing boats, it is still not available for passenger ferries or cargo barges. So the utility of ferries and cargo harbors is still very hit or miss and can be completely cut off if the corner of a locked quadrant of the map cuts into the body of water that the ferries and barges are using. If a body of water extends outside the city boundaries before looping back into the city's boundaries, I still cannot create a ferry or freight line that connects nodes at opposite ends of that body of water. How is this still a problem? Worse yet, Colossal Order seems to have specifically designed some of its new maps to make sure that this would be a problem for those older mechanics. Similar problems extend to other transit infrastructure as well. I honestly believe that we should be able to build highway and rail outside of the city limits, even if it cost more money. we should be able to connect up to those existing roads and rail networks that are already on the map but outside of the city boundaries without necessarily having to buy all of the land in between, especially with that paltry 9-quadrant limit that the vanilla game locks players to. After Sunset Harbor, Colossal Order has apparently started to take such issues into consideration. The latest few expansions have actually included new infrastructure and mechanics that extend the functionality of earlier base game and legacy expansion content. This includes the addition of more variety of transit options for legacy transit infrastructure, such as new transit hubs, mixed-use transit roads, and adding specialized pedestrian roads that include integrated bus lanes, trolley lanes, and so forth. The latest expansion, Hotels and Resorts, has even added new buildings for the amusement park, zoo, and nature preserve that were introduced in Park Life. That's right, new expansions for Cities Skylines are finally starting to add content that also extends previous expansions. It's about damn time. The hotels and retreats are also a good supplement to After Dark, Park Life, and Plazas and Promenades, as well as to the Financial District's mini DLC. Honestly, hotels and retreats could have just been part of the Plazas and Promenades expansion. These new hotels kind of replace the legacy tourism specialization buildings, but not really. Those new hotels are specialized for being built in specific types of locations and work alongside the tourism and leisure specialization districts. They definitely do not replace After Dark's tourism specialty districts, at least not anywhere near to the extent that Industries replaced the need to ever zone legacy agriculture, forestry, mining, or drilling specializations, or the way that airports rendered the legacy ploppable airports completely moot and borderline useless. The UI and organization of some of this new content could also be better. For example, the new sports arenas that came with the Sports Arenas DLC actually do, much to my surprise, use the same rules as the Matchday stadiums. But they aren't located within the Matchday tab, so players may not initially realize that they function similar to Matchday stadiums. They also sadly cannot pull double duty as a varsity sports arena in a university campus. I wish that any sports arena built in a campus area could be made part of the college's varsity sports program. Though, to be clear, I'm talking about the actual arenas and stadiums and not the little community park ploppables. Those are parks, they're not stadiums. Those definitely should not be able to be part of a college's varsity sports program because they're more akin to what you would see at like a high school level. Also, it is a shame that the pedestrian areas of parks and promenades cannot overlap with park life or campus areas. This has severely limited my creativity with the new pedestrian areas and completely killed many of the concepts that I had for new city layouts when I was getting hyped up for that particular expansion. And speaking of campus, even that expansion did some things that I really liked, but I didn't get to talk about them because I didn't get a chance to play the game until after I had already published the previous video. So, Campus basically copied the same idea of the previous two expansions with their paintable areas and modular park complexes, except instead of city parks and industrial parks, it's, university campuses. But Campus does do one thing that elevates the core concept, which is that it introduces the idea of a university area being able to de-level if it is not properly maintained. This is actually a really great idea, and in true Cities Skylines expansion fashion, it's a damn shame that this concept wasn't backported to the Park Life and Industries content. And then, to make matters worse, they didn't even bother to forward port it into the airport's expansion either. I don't know, was de-leveling the universities an unpopular feature within the Skylines community and playtesters? So did Colossal Order just decide to ditch it based on player feedback? I honestly thought it was the best idea in that expansion, and the only really new concept that was introduced in Campus. In fact, city infrastructure de-leveling due to age and/or poor maintenance or lack of use by the public is an idea that has a lot of potential within this game and also for the sequel, hint hint, wink wink, nudge nudge. An amusement park, industrial park, university campus, or airport de-leveling could lead to a reduction in nearby land value, which could, in turn, lead to urban decay, which is something that Skylines doesn't really model at all. If similar leveled infrastructure is part of Cities Skylines 2, I really hope that they are able to de-level as well, and that de-leveling such infrastructure has an impact on the neighboring land values. And we do know from the developer updates that Cities Skylines 2 will implement rent features, and land value will affect the rent that Sims pay to live in their homes. So the idea of lowering land value leading to urban decay is actually a very realistic possibility within the sequel. Whether or not it's going to be in the vanilla launch of the sequel is still up in the air. In addition to finally releasing expansion content that upgrades and expands previous expansion content, Colossal Order has also finally started adding some very specific assets that I've been wanting and begging for years now. Most notably, the content creator packs have finally added native parking lots and parking garages, which makes a huge difference when trying to create more realistic American suburbs. They also allow the creation of more realistic-looking park-and-ride transit station, as well as things like large sports stadiums, airports, universities, apartment complexes, shopping malls, and so forth. There are some mod assets that I've been using for a long time, which I might still continue to use. One of them is this gravel parking lot by Hank. It looks really good with certain nature preserves, farms, and other isolated infrastructure or in rural areas. And the parking lots from the content creator pack simply don't have anything like it. There's also mod assets for other sizes and shapes of parking lots as well as garages that I may continue to use as well. I also love that I finally have those small public sports parks that I mentioned earlier, like football fields and baseball diamonds, to go along with the basketball court, tennis court, and community pools that we've had in the game for a while now. A football field and a baseball diamond can go a long way towards making an American high school campus look a lot more like a real American high school. And now I don't have to resort to mod assets to get these things in my games anymore. Furthermore, a lot of these new content packs also give players access to some of the props that are used to create them. Chairs, tables, fences, flooring, and even soccer nets and football goalposts are available to the player to make your own custom parks or plazas, which is also a great way to decorate and fill in little nooks and corners that aren't really big enough for another building. Once again, I hope that Cities Skylines 2 follows suit and gives the player access to many of the props to be freely placed within the city for decorative purposes. Furthermore, I hope that things like food trucks, newspaper stands, and kiosks will actually be things that citizens in Cities Skylines 2 will actually use appropriately. It would be awesome if, for example, a food truck or hot dog stand in Cities Skylines 2 could actually provide like one job and actually sell a small amount of food to citizens. That way, large parks and plazas that are decorated with these formerly superficial decorations would actually be functional and would attract large populations of pedestrians, instead of having these massive, heavily decorated plaza areas that nobody ever even bothers to walk through because none of these things are actual, like, objects in the game that Sims visit. Honestly, the only really big thing that is still missing from Cities Skylines is appropriate assets for creating a public beach. We still, unfortunately, don't have native support for placing things like lifeguard towers or surf shops, nor do we ever see people on the beaches sunbathing, swimming, building sandcastles, or surfing. I don't have to go to mods for my football fields and parking lots anymore, but I do still, unfortunately, need mods to build my beaches. And it isn't like Colossal Order hasn't had plenty of opportunity to add such assets. After Dark, with its focus on tourism and leisure, was the first prime opportunity to introduce such assets. Having beaches as a type of park area in park life was perhaps the best opportunity for them to introduce such assets. But beaches and their tourism appeal would also have been appropriate as part of the airports or the Sunset Harbor expansions as well. And beaches as part of a seaside boardwalk would also have been a great fit for plazas and promenades. And then finally, of course, hotels and retreats seemed to offer the final opportunity for Colossal Order to add beaches and accompanying resort hotels to the game, but they still opted not to. Shame. So it's going to be back to mods for those. Oh, sure, there's also some other stuff that I would like to see in Cities Skylines as well. Modular public beaches, ski resorts, golf courses, and water parks would all be fun additions to further supplement the park life parks, and boardwalks would have been a great inclusion with plazas and promenades. I wouldn't mind seeing the ability to create gated residential communities and homeowners associations. I really wish we could just paint areas with floor textures instead of having to place them as individual squares. Well, they kind of did this with the concrete skirts that were added to airports as part of the Hotels and Retreats update, but it's something that's only sort of useful. And of course, it would also be nice to be able to plant trees and shrubbery in clusters instead of one at a time, and also to be able to paint large areas with them. Ah well, I guess I'll have to add those to my Cities Skylines 2 wish lists as well. Oh, and it would be nice if we were able to enable any mods used by a particular save game from within the load game menu, instead of having to remember to check the save games tab in the content manager to make sure that all the mods I need are enabled. Hopefully that is something that the sequel will fix. Nevertheless, so much of the content that's been added this past year is stuff that I've been waiting for a really long time in this game. And I just really wish that stuff like sports parks, parking lots, and resort hotels had been added to the game like a year or two ago or earlier, so that I could have had more time to play with them before the sequel releases and I likely stop playing the original. I also want to say that I'm happy to see that some of the ideas and assets that have been introduced into Cities Skylines in the recent expansions and content updates will also appear in the sequel. Previews of Cities Skylines 2 have already shown that parking lots and garages will be in that game. More so, parking will be an actual mechanic, and the price and availability of parking will be a major component in determining the transit method and route that commuters will take. We've also seen that some of the newer sports parks will also be in the sequel. Football fields and soccer pitches are plainly visible in the trailers and screenshots, and I would assume that baseball diamonds will probably also be in the game. I don't know if they're gonna put in like the cricket pitches and stuff like that, but who knows, we'll see. It's still unclear if a park area mechanic will be in the sequel, but we do know that city service buildings like universities, airports, and transit hubs can be expanded and upgraded to increase their capacity or provide additional functionality in a method similar to what SimCity 2013 did. Now, before you lose your shit over the fact that Cities Skylines 2 is doing something that SimCity 2013 did, I want to reassure you that this particular thing that they're stealing from that game was probably the one and only good idea that SimCity 2013 had, and so I, for one, am happy to see it in the sequel to Cities Skylines. Will this provide a degree of customization and expressiveness on par with what expansions like Park Life Industries, Campus, and Airports provided? I hope so. I don't know. We'll find out when the game launches. And there's also many concepts from popular mods that will be included in the sequel, such as more detailed road customization and commuters that are finally smart enough to use all of the lanes available on a road instead of sitting in traffic jams when there's like 2 or 3 open lanes that they could be using. And of course, the day-night cycle, weather, and seasonal cycles will also all be in the vanilla sequel. No expansions required, though it's still unclear if there's going to be like disasters or stuff like that. That might require an expansion. So I'm hoping that Cities Skylines 2 will take the best ideas from the first Cities Skylines and its expansions, combine them with the best mod features from that first game, and introduce a few new ideas like the aforementioned parking, urban decay, and multi-use zoning. I'm hoping that the sequel will not feel like going back to vanilla Cities Skylines, as is the case with a lot of games like this. Bare bones and incomplete compared to previous game that had 20 expansions. And so I'm hoping that I won't, get bored of Cities Skylines 2 and start to miss all of the original game's expansion content. But I do know that there will be some things that I expect to be there which we already know won't be there. Perhaps the biggest offender currently is that bicycles and bike lanes are not going to be in the vanilla release of Cities Skylines 2, at least not at launch. Maybe we'll get that as a free update down the road, or maybe it will be part of an expansion. Hopefully the first expansion, because it seems like a no-brainer of a thing to include in the game, and I'm honestly really surprised that it isn't going to be in the vanilla launch. In any case, I'm actually feeling really optimistic for the prospects of expansions to Cities Skylines 2. The last couple of expansions and DLCs for Cities Skylines partially addressed some of my biggest frustrations with the original game's expansion model, and it seems to indicate a shift in the design philosophy that Colossal Order is taking to its expansions. It's a big move in the right direction. This has me very excited about the prospects for the sequel. I really hope that going into Cities Skylines 2, that Colossal Order takes a more holistic approach to any new expansions that they add to the game, and that they look at how new features and assets from those expansions could augment legacy assets, and that the sequel's inevitable expansions will be more robust and well-rounded expansions than what we saw in the first game. Well, I hope you're also excited for Cities Skylines 2, and thanks for watching. Now I have to get back to perfecting my existing cities in anticipation of the sequel.